God knows, there's never been a time where the world needs more invention. We have more problems than we've ever had. We're not going to solve them in a world of stuff. We'll solve them with a world that becomes more and more and more about ideas.
Hi, I'm Dan Novak, and welcome to the first in a series of interviews about the importance of invention, one of our favorite topics here at Qualcomm. In this episode, I talk with one of the great inventors and entrepreneurs of our generation, Dean Kamen. Dean's the inventor of the Segway, but he's also credited with more than 440 U.S. and foreign patents. He's created a variety of innovative medical technologies, such as the iBot mobility device and a prosthetic arm designed for injured soldiers. As a tireless advocate for science and technology, Dean's proudest accomplishment is founding FIRST. It's an organization dedicated to motivating the next generation to understand and enjoy science and technology. More than 1 million kids from age 8 to 18 in 86 countries participate annually. Dean shares how he got started on the path of invention. Dean, thanks for being with us.
It's always great to be with Qualcomm.
So let's start with your beginning. So what made a kid who was struggling in school, had dyslexia, have the confidence to think he could become an inventor?
I had no other alternative. As you just pointed out, I was not a good student. Some kids, you can give them a textbook on any subject, they read the stuff, and they can get an A on the test. That's different than understanding everything that they read. You give me a book, I'm a very, very slow reader, and any new concept, I get hung up thinking about it, trying to understand it, not be familiar with it, not be able to spit it back, but really understand it. And when you look at, an elementary science book, it's got Newton's laws of motion, it's got electricity, it's got magnetism, it's got gyroscopes, it's got so much stuff in it. Each one of those concepts to me was so fascinating and so amazing, and to really, quote, understand it would take me days, weeks, months, to this day, years, to really understand some of the basic concepts. But I realized at one point that if I could really understand some of those things, maybe at a different level than what you needed to do in school to pass a test, I could use that understanding to solve problems, to create new things that didn't exist before. So to me, I didn't become an inventor as an alternative to all the other things I could do. I started doing these things because I thought it was the only thing I could do.
So, given those challenges as a child, there must have been other things about your environment or your household or your family that actually enabled you to take what was or might have been seen as a disadvantage and turning it into an opportunity.
Well, I had parents, good parents that care a lot, so on the one hand, they weren't thrilled that I had trouble in school, and they certainly weren't thrilled when I announced later on that I was going to at least temporarily quit going to school to work on my stuff. After all, my older brother, the MD, PhD, doctor, professor, had just sailed through school, and there he was. And my mom has her doctor, her first son, and me struggling along, but I was building stuff for him that he needed, even as a medical student that he needed. And I realized if I could do it at my pace and I could go as deeply as I needed into some problem until I could see it from so many different sides, that maybe I could come up with a solution that wasn't in a textbook, I thought I could add value. But I think my parents appreciated that I worked very hard. They appreciated I was working on the right things. But like all parents, they were concerned that I was taking a very risky path. But after giving me their best advice as to why I shouldn't do that, once I decided to do that, my parents got behind me. They supported me, and that was a huge help to me.
So some of us as kids, as tinkerers, would take apart like an alarm clock and try and put it back together. You took apart a house. Tell me about that.
Well, after I spent the first couple of years with my parents' support in their basement, building out a full electronic shop, and in one room of the basement, and in the other room near the, hot water heater and others. I had my little production tables, and I finally had filled up the whole basement with all this electronic stuff, making circuit boards by using my mom's oven and ferric chloride and G10. But I started needing mechanical stuff. I needed milling machines and lathes to make some of the stuff I was working on. A, you couldn't carry it through a house and down a flight of stairs. And B, there was no room. My electronics was there. But I had made a lot of money. My mom was a teacher, high school teacher. My dad's a self-employed artist, and they did okay, but in a summer or two as a kid back then, when people started paying for the stuff I was doing, I made a lot of money even compared to them. And so as a gift to them for letting me take over their basement, I bought them a couple of tickets for a cruise. But I had been planning while doing that if I took their backyard right up against the back wall of that foundation, the other side of the wall for all my electronics was all that wasted space under that backyard lawn. What if I dig a hole in the backyard, 10 feet deep, right up along the back of the house, bash a hole through the foundation, pour the wall out the size of the backyard. Now you'd have this great big extra room attached to the basement. And I figured if they're away, we'll just do this job and won't make a mess. And I also figured if I really ask them if I can do this, they might not think it's a great idea. I go to pick them up. I just got my driver's license, and I pick them up at the yard in New York, drive them home. They see this mess. And all my father did is look at my mom and say, "What's for dinner?" It was fantastic. So yes, I lifted my parents' house up, put a machine shop underneath it, and put the house back down. But it worked.
Extraordinary. So, growing up, who was your inspiration? What made you want to do what you do?
I would say I've been inspired by Archimedes and Galileo and Newton. When you read what these guys did, it's astounding how, by observation, they gave us an understanding of the whole universe. But among the living, I don't know who I would have picked, but I used to say to people, not my dad. I have no talent. He's the most talented artist I've ever seen. I like math and science. That's not him. But I realized, mostly because of advice he gave me at one point, that my father and I are very similar. He was a self-employed artist. He got up every morning, went into a room, and to create something that didn't exist before. That's what he did. He never had a job. He worked at creating things. And as a young adult, he once said to me, when I said, "I have no talent," he said, "No, you and I are very similar. We just use different tools. And you get up every day and create things. But you create them with machines and electronics and mathematics. I create them with a canvas and a brush. You need to find something that you love to do so much. You would do it whether people are paying you or not. And if you can get good enough at doing something like that, that you can support yourself doing it, you'll be the happiest person around." I used that line on him when I quit school 10 years later and said, "Father, you're the one that told me I have to go do something that I'd love to do. You're the one that told me I have to get good enough at doing something that I can support myself doing it. And that's what I'm going to do."
So we heard about your father and the impact on your life. And when I think about FIRST, I think you're the father of 1 million inventors. What's that feel like?
I think that's a great way to sum it up. People frequently ask me, "What's the most important project you've ever worked on?" And typically I'd say, well, you can't answer that. How do you compare making something, let's say a diabetes pump that might help millions of people, to a prosthetic arm that might only help a few dozen of these brave young people that literally gave their arms for this country? But if you were one of those people that lost an arm, you'd say that's pretty important. Some of the things I make hopefully will impact millions of people. Some, only a few, but they're in very big need and they deserve this stuff. I don't know how you compare projects like that. But it's now become easy for me to answer the question, what project have you done that will have the most impact? Well, if each of these other projects, whether it's a water machine or a dialysis machine or some piece of medical equipment or whatever else, no matter what it is, it's a solution to a problem that will help somebody or some group. But if it's really that important that these inventions have to come, if invention is what raises the bar, well, then your metric for what's the most important thing you ever did ought to be, what if you could create inventors? What if you could create hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of the next generation of inventors? What if each one of those inventors can do something to solve a problem that this world needs solved? So the leverage of inventing inventors has to be, in the long run, the most significant thing we will have left behind.
Where did the idea come from for FIRST?
I really started FIRST because I thought that while everybody was complaining, we have a society that's good at identifying problems and better at blaming people for them than solving them. It's easier to blame people than to solve a problem. And even back 25, 30 years ago when this was started, everybody was worried and complaining about the education crisis. Hey, my mom's a teacher, a dedicated teacher. It was easy for, whether it's political leaders or business leaders or parents, to complain about schools, complain about education. We have an education crisis because it was certainly true. The data was showing American kids were falling dramatically behind their counterparts around the world. And not just in the most advanced countries that had the high standard of living. US students weren't doing as well in math and science as places in the world that have nowhere near the resources to spend on education that we do. But we have an education crisis because they didn't like the outcome. But I'm an inventor. What do inventors do? We look at the same problems as everybody else, but maybe see them differently. Why are these kids not doing as well? So I said, let's say it's not an education problem, it's a culture problem. It's not a lack of supply, schools, books, it's a lack of demand. Let's say, because ironically we are a rich country, because we had reached a point where kids had leisure time. Unlike most of the rest of the world, kids don't have to spend a lot of time going to find clean water every day or firewood or fuel. What if, because we had created essentially the wealth and the luxury, that we invented concepts like leisure time? We invented, a world where the role models and superheroes for kids weren't as they were when this country got started. People like Edison and the Wright brothers and people that were solving problems. What if, particularly for women and minorities in this country, the only role models they were seeing now in this rich country were people from the world of entertainment and sports and leisure activities? Well, in a free country where you get the best of what you celebrate, if we celebrate these superheroes of the NBA, the NFL, Hollywood, why wouldn't kids all put their energy and passion into emulating those people? So I decided, okay, we know how to get kids passionate about something. You make fun, after-school, aspirational events like football and basketball. You make celebrations of the skill sets these kids will acquire. You do things like the Academy Awards. And I said, well, why can't we take the content of engineering and physics and math and package it up in something that we know works? These after-school, aspirational activities where there's not quizzes and tests, there's trophies and school bands and mascots and cheerleaders. All the stuff that kids love doesn't have to be focused on bouncing a ball or kicking a ball or running around a stage. What if we could make something every bit as exciting to kids as these other things, with one difference? Every kid on every one of our teams could turn pro. There aren't millions of jobs in the NBA. We don't need that many 7-foot-tall people that can bounce a ball. But there are millions of jobs out there for people that have the technical skills, the mathematical understanding. I said, we can create a sport that's every bit as much fun as any other sport, but it will give these kids the tools, the skills they need to succeed in an ever more technical world. Don't think of it as a program in which kids are building robots. We're using robots to build kids. We're using these robots to give kids the opportunity to learn from world-class experts in science, technology, engineering, and to learn how to communicate and cooperate with each other. So I started collecting the best of the corporations, of the universities, of the government agencies. You know, our biggest supplier of teams is NASA, Qualcomm, Department of Defense, major universities. And now we have 3,700 corporate sponsors. We have 140,000 volunteer mentors from the tech community. We have 50, right this year we gave out $50 million in scholarships from 200 universities. This coalition that brings together the best of the best from government, from industry, it's just working.
So you have this tendency to take on really big projects, which translates to a lot of failure. How do you think about failure, and how do you use that with FIRST and with the kids?
It all depends on how you define failure, I guess. I think a lot of people never try to solve really big problems, either societies or even their own, because if it's a really big problem, it's probably hard and you'll probably fail at least a few times along the way. And most people are afraid of failure. The reason I take on big problems is a couple of things. Number one, if you take on a little problem and then fail, you really feel dumb. If you take on really big problems and you fail and people look at you and ridicule you, you can look back at them and say, oh yeah, you didn't solve this one. And at least I'm trying. So I don't mind failing as long as I can learn from my failures. I'd rather fail trying to do something really big and important than succeed at something that was essentially wasting time. But to me, no matter how many times you fall down 7 times. If you stand up 8 times, you didn't fail. You learned 7 lessons, and you're going to move on. And as long as you can stay focused on trying to solve that big problem, eventually you're going to solve it. And that's the way I go through life.
So as an inventor, there's this small universe of really talented, successful inventors out there. Do you ever see an invention out there and say, damn, I wish I had invented that?
I almost think the hallmark of a good invention, a really good invention, is one where you look at it and you go, oh, look at that, it's elegance, look at that. In fact, many times somebody will look at the stuff I'm showing them and they'll say, oh, I could have thought of that. And then they almost feel badly, like they were minimizing it. And I say, that's the highest compliment you could ever give me. But by the way, you could have thought of it. We did think of it. We did deliver this. And now people are getting the benefit of what we built. And it's a very energizing thing to see the stuff you do out there making a difference.
So let's talk a little bit about the smartphone. So the largest technology platform in the history of man, transformational technology. How do you use it?
Communications is one of the basic methods by which humans evolve and learn and separate ourselves from most of the other animals, right? And now we can communicate not just this way. We can communicate pretty much with anybody, anywhere, anytime. And you don't just communicate words. You're communicating through GPS position. You're communicating through looking at that satellite information. You're communicating a very good prediction of what the weather is going to be like in a place that you may or may not want to be a week from today. So when you think about the capabilities that, let's say, Qualcomm as an example, CDMA as an example, the power of those technologies to give humans the capability to do things that were unthinkable a couple of generations ago is astounding. These kids take it all for granted, but it's astounding.
So there seems to be an attack on invention. at different times and an attack on intellectual property. How do you think about that, and how do we continue to incent companies to invest and individuals to invest their time and invent?
There's a couple of different reasons I think that invention is under attack. Some of them are innocent. People just don't know better. Some of them are not innocent. People have been trying to game the system. For instance, as was Willie Sutton was asking, why do you rob banks? Well, that's because that's where the money is, right? I think the patent system wasn't under attack in the past few hundred years as it has been recently, ironically because the value of intellectual property wasn't as critically important back then as it is now. You know, 100 years ago, big money and big companies, was it oil, was it steel, was it railroads? Now look at the most valuable companies in the world. It's not the people with thousands of acres of farmland and people even with oil wells. It's not this world of stuff anymore, whether it's oil or wheat or land. Look at the biggest companies in the world now, richest, most valuable companies in the world, whether it's Google, Facebook, or Qualcomm. They're companies whose value isn't stuff, it's ideas. And once I think it became clear that the value of intellectual property had gotten to be the most valuable thing, as it should be. People that don't have great ideas, people that would like to benefit from the great ideas of others, decided it's probably easier, like Willie Sutton would point out, to steal it from a bank than to earn it. And the way you steal in the world of stuff is you fight in wars over land, or you go and fight or rob a bank. Well, the way you steal intellectual ideas is you undermine the patent system. You make it hard for somebody who really had a good idea to get a patent, or to protect a patent, or to do all the things that used to be the incentives by which we ask individuals and companies to invest their time, their money, their reputation in doing things that are really hard, to do things that most people don't want to take the risk to do, especially if after they deliver it, you could just take it away from them. But while most Americans, I think, certainly believe in a system of law where you can own real property, you have a deed, your neighbor can't come in, the government can't come in, it's mine. Here's my deed. Most Americans believe if they bought a bond from the government, it said, the government of the United States promises to pay the bearer on demand because of this document. Most people believe, yeah, the government would collapse, society would collapse if the government would say, oh, I know I gave you that bond with that seal, but instead of saying, we promise to pay the bearer on demand, it said, we promise to pay the bearer, maybe. You couldn't have an organized society if you didn't trust in things like the rule of law or the value of intellectual property. But people don't realize that a patent, like the deed to your house, is proof that you own that physical property. A patent is proof that you own that idea. And I'd argue, by the way, that a patent is something you have more of a right to own than home. We didn't invent the planet. We didn't invent that land. In fact, go back a few hundred years and there's some pretty unhappy stories about how we acquired that land and have the right to sell it to somebody else. Who did we take it from? Whereas you come up with an idea. You didn't take it from anybody else. It never existed before. It's your idea. So I think we need to educate people, not just kids, but we need to educate people that make decisions in the Congress, in the court system, that if they do things, probably unintentionally, but they do things that undermine the intellectual property system, if they do things that would make it hard for an inventor to get investors to support her or him, if they do things that in any way remove any of the powerful incentives for somebody to invent, there'll be less invention. And God knows, there's never been a time where the world needs more invention. We have more problems than we've ever had. We're not going to solve them in a world of stuff. We'll solve them with a world that becomes more and more and more about ideas. By the way, most people think big companies don't like patents. Only big companies that don't want change don't like patents. Because when I go to big companies and say, look, I've got a better way to do something, they're hoping we have a patent. They're hoping it's good because they know that after I invested time and energy and made this patent, they're going to have to invest lots of money in people to bring it to scale. Why should they do it? Well, because this patent says if they do it, and if they make this enormous investment, and if they succeed, maybe there'll be cell towers everywhere, which are way better than those landlines. But what's going to induce these companies to make these huge investments? It's the fact that they'll be protected. Just like you wouldn't build a house without a deed, they're not going to build a communication system without a deed. Your deed for physical property for your house, their deed was the patent on CDMA. Well, all of a sudden, you get the people in Washington that don't see some of those connections. And we've seen changes to the patent system that reflect the fact that we'd rather have in the short term a view, and it's wrong, but a perception that by getting rid of patents, we'll accelerate innovation. Or by getting rid of patents, we'll lower the cost of things. First of all, the total amount of royalties that get paid on patent is so small you can't find it in the price of most products. Secondly, those products wouldn't exist at all if there weren't patents that created them. But finally, if somebody's got a patent on something and they want too much, you know what people do? Inventors go out and say, I got to make something better. And so the fact that I might have something that blocks you from doing something encourages you to go find a better way to do it. So I think when you look at a mega scale at what patents do, they increase competition, they raise the bar, they're a win for everybody that wants the future to be better than the past. The only people that I think don't like patents are people that are, frankly, fat, dumb, and happy with where they are today. I'm on top, and I don't want it to change. So let me prevent anybody from coming up with some really big idea that can obsolete what I'm doing. So people that like to look backward, people like the status quo, are terrified by inventors and their patents. People that want the future to be better than what we ever could have imagined love the idea that there's an incentive system out there that's going to take all the people that have that positive vision and people that are just optimists from going forward.
So Dean, when you talk about ideas and talk about the future, what do you see out there over the next 10 or 20 years? There are people who think the world's going to be a better place, the world's going to be a worse place. What's out there that you see that could be really transformational to the world and humankind?
I think the most categorical statement I'll say about the future is that none of us have any good perspective on it. It used to be, at the rate invention came along, that whatever you invented would be good for your generation. It would probably create problems that you would hand down to the next generation. But it would take a generation for you to absorb the great things you did and leave the new problems to the oncoming generation. Even in my lifetime, we invented things like plastic bottles and styrofoam cups, and it made it easy to get safe, clean, you know, until we realized a generation or two later, so many of these plastics are just not degrading quickly, and they're filling up big pockets in the ocean, and the styrofoam cups are a problem. And then there are people that say, see, we don't want technology. Well, I don't see them running back to go rub sticks together in a cave. My answer to, once you learn that a technology is not perfect, is not, let's go backward. It's, okay, let's make that styrofoam cup. Let's give it all these properties. It's got to be lightweight and sterile and clean and waterproof. But when I throw it on the ground, in about a month, it turns into fertilizer. To me, you don't replace bad technology with no technology or going backward. You replace technology that has some limitations with better technology that removes those limitations. That's called progress. But if I sit here today and tell you what I think will be the big solutions 20, 30, 50 years from today, I'd not only be wrong, when you look back at it with the benefit of hindsight, you'd be saying, those were not only not the real solutions, he didn't even understand what the real problems were. Because 20 years from today, all the things we're worried about today, because we're worried about them today, they'll be solved. But 20 years from today, there'll be a whole new class of problems that the kids on the FIRST teams are going to be sitting there saying, we've got to solve this. But if they have the right tools and they have the right inspiration, they'll solve them.
Dean Kamen, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed getting to know Dean Kamen. You can listen to the entire interview with Dean on the Qualcomm podcast, and I invite you to follow me on Twitter. To learn more about FIRST, visit firstinspires.org.